the idea of climate attribution is a fairly new idea, and it's to enable climate litigation and policy making with some certainty. So the idea is to, look at some extreme weather event, for example, and be able to say that this event was 5 times more likely because of the global climate change, the warming that we've seen up to now.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the Climate Emergency Forum. My name is Regina, and I'm your host as we discuss climate attribution. So when we talk about climate attribution, what we're talking about is impacts on the climate that we can directly implicate through climate change. This is a very important topic, especially for those of you who may have some friends or family members who still don't believe in climate change. Hopefully there's not too many of you out there. But for those of you who do, or if that's not even the case, if you simply want to know how global warming is affecting things such as rain, drought, heat, cooling trends, what we're talking about when we are looking to these things is attribution. How much does global warming attribute to various climate behaviors? We'll bring to your attention this really interesting website. It's called climateattribution.org, and it's really, really neat. We'll put the link in the description, and I recommend it for you to check it out, even if you just take a glance at it. It's a repository of hundreds of articles. You can look them up in terms of impact of global warming. You can look it up in terms of like the source. For example, what are the contributions of different sectors, activities, and entities to climate change? If that sounds too nebulous, you can look at it in terms of extreme event attribution. We know that Hurricane Harvey was much worse than it would have been without a global warming attribution because of the slowing of the jet stream. That storm just came right over Houston and it just stayed there. It didn't move out. So we think that this is something that's very interesting to bring to your attention. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Paul, who maybe can give us some more in-depth analysis of climate change attribution and how we've been seeing it in our very lifetimes. Paul?
Yes, the idea of climate attribution is a fairly new idea, and it's to enable climate litigation and policy making with some certainty. So the idea is to, look at some extreme weather event, for example, and be able to say that this event was 5 times more likely because of the global climate change, the warming that we've seen up to now, sort of to try to put some hard statistics and numbers on it. Now, it's important to remember that climate and weather statistics has changed completely, okay? In order to set up statistics, you need some sort of stationarity in the system, which we did have. So you could say, for example, a particular weather event, a flood, a drought, heat wave, etc., would happen maybe with the occurrence of 1 in 100 years or 1 in 1,000 years. But what's been happening with the rapidly changing climate system is that those statistics are no longer valid. When you get 1 in 1,000 year event, every few years, 3 or 4 of them in the space of a decade, you start thinking, well, something's really messed up with the statistics. And it is. So this is why I like to call it the climate casino. Things are much more uncertain now as they are in a casino. There's a lot more randomness. So the reason this is occurring is the warming is very uneven on the planet. The poles are warming much faster. So the temperature difference between the poles and the equator is reduced, so the jet streams slow down and become wavier just from the simple physics of why the jet streams exist. So that causes extreme weather events to increase in frequency, severity, duration, and they're happening in places where they haven't happened before. And there's also something I call weather whiplashing or climate whiplashing, where we go from one extreme, like flooding, torrential rains and flooding, to another extreme, terrible drought, then back to, in the third year, back to terrible flooding again. So we whiplash from one thing to the other. So the whole idea of attribution is to try to get a handle on how much climate is impacting these weather extremes, weather patterns. That's the whole idea of extreme weather attribution. It's just another way of trying to explain to the public and to policymakers and governments that these weather extremes are more and more chaotic and they're happening. We need to think that all of these weather events and things are happening under a different climate system, a much warmer background, if you like. There's more water vapor in the atmosphere. There's more energy in the atmosphere. So we get more of these extremes. And I just want to give you a quick example of some of these extremes. I think Peter will go into some more of the details. But right now, we're experiencing wildfires, tremendously warm, burning huge amounts of forest areas above and beyond what people have seen before. The fires are behaving differently. They're burning much hotter. They're traveling much faster. They're incinerating structures in their path very quickly. So we've had just a horrendous series of fires in Nova Scotia near the city of Halifax, populated city, over 200 structures destroyed, many homes, etc., just in the last few days. Also major fires in New Brunswick. I don't need to mention Alberta. Alberta, over the last month or two, has been extremely dry. Huge numbers of fires. Of course, remember a few years ago in Alberta, Fort McMurray, the town of Fort McMurray, was almost destroyed by massive wildfires. BC, lots of wildfires just a few years ago. Remember Lytton, BC, reached almost 50 degrees Celsius. The town burned down. The COP a few years ago was in Scotland. And I remember going up to Loch Lomond and doing some traveling around northern Scotland. Well, northern Scotland is experiencing unprecedented wildfires at the moment, with smoke clouding out areas, many of the famous lochs in northern Scotland. Ottawa we're surrounded by forests here. It rained a couple weeks ago for one day, not too much rain. Before then, it was about 2 weeks prior. At the beginning of April, we had an ice storm and lots of precipitation, but it's like a switch has been shut or turned on, saying no more rain. So what climate is doing, what climate disruption is doing, is it's turning these switches. So it's not just a matter of we're getting half of our rainfall or a third of our rainfall. It's no rain. No rain, essentially, over the last 3-4 weeks. If this continues another month or so, which I think it did, that's been sort of the pattern, the last few years, and we will be in severe drought. Any sparks or any lightning from distant storms or from storms that don't deposit much rainfall can trigger these. It's like we're on a threshold of burning. And this is, I think, a huge feedback for the climate system. It gets so hot that eventually all the surface vegetation is at threat of just burning. We lose the carbon sink and we produce lots of CO2 and other things that go up into the atmosphere. So it's things are pretty dire.
Thank you so much, Paul. And I really appreciate you sharing all of that information, especially regarding the wildfires. It's a tremendously scary topic. And in terms of attribution, I just read, I think this past week in the New York Times, that many insurance companies are not going to be covering homeowners insurance in many parts of California. Either they won't be, or it will be very expensive. And why is this? Because they are just getting hit with too many claims from homes and businesses being lost to these major climate impacts that are happening in the West, in California. And of course, it doesn't stop in the West. It goes all the way up north into the western part of Canada. So attribution science, as you rightly mentioned, Paul, is very, very important for many, many aspects, legal aspects, as well, of course, as home insurance and all types of insurance that involve climate. There's a lot of research papers that can help you learn about how these various changes are implicated in these weather events. So for those of you who may have friends, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, who still have their doubts about climate change, go ahead and tell them about how hard it is for people to get insurance in California and why might that be? Because it's not a conspiracy, it's all about money. All right, and this is financial impacts of climate change are very real. And people are taking note, companies are taking note. And I would love to hear your thoughts on climate attribution, Peter.
Thanks, and thanks for that good background, Paul. So I took a look yesterday at the website. I went through the website. Of course, we both visited it often. It's interesting. It was the project was started up in 2015, essentially by two leading experts, and they've now done 50 of these attribution studies. This is, in many aspects, to my mind, the most useful, the best science that we have. And there are two reasons for that in my mind. One is we can all remember that these, extreme heat, drought, which we never really had before, anything as bad. And the scientists will be interviewed and the meteorologists, and they would say, well, this fire was unusual, but we cannot say that one single event is related to climate change. And this just got, this went on for some years. So it was really this big project with the statistics that Paul has mentioned. And they draw in a team of scientists from around the world when they do one of these. And they use various model approaches. So it's not just sort of one method that they're using. And it's interesting to me that there were really only a couple of these extraordinary extreme events which they weren't confident were due to climate change, although they said that they couldn't exclude climate change. But in the rest, the statistics proved that it was very definite. They were very, very confident that these events would not have happened if it wasn't for global warming and climate change. The other reason why they're very useful is the denial campaign. The denial campaign is as aggressive, as deadly, as misleading and confusing as ever. And these people are maliciously clever. They will quote stuff from a scientist somewhere, or they will quote some weird thing that they found somewhere about rainfall, for example. And the denial campaign is on these events immediately, and the networks are full of it. So the IPCC, of course, but in particular, these scientists in attribution, they, for us at least, they have solved that issue. And it's terrible it has to be solved. So another reason for attribution is, and I think this goes way back to the denial campaign, why have we been forced in 2000 and 2003 to do these very complicated methods to prove? Well, it's because we've never done risk. And we've been sort of forced into that situation back in the late 80s, early 90s, because at that time, there were a number of scientists, a few of them, well qualified, who were saying, no, climate change isn't happening. It's all nonsense. Global warming isn't real, blah, blah, blah. As I say, they've performed 50. They've done two big ones this year, both in April. You'll remember, of course, Portugal, fantastic, unbelievable levels of heat in Portugal in April, and Algeria and Morocco in North Africa. We're talking about temperatures and levels of drought which we've just never had before. The other one was, of course, and this is awful because this is definitely the shape of things to come, is the extreme persistent humid heat that hit on India and also hit on the Indochina Peninsula with Thailand and Laos and Cambodia and Vietnam. And the peninsula, the scientists say, is going to be stuck in that kind of record heat for probably the rest of the summer. So we have huge populations now suffering severely with extreme weather events, particularly the heat. Now, of course, the scientists have always known that heat events would increase with global warming. I checked yesterday, it is in the very first 1990 IPCC assessment. But we are still have a problem with the so-called belief in the United States on global warming, because there was a recent poll, one of the big polls came out. Yes, we now have more than half Americans, maybe up to 60% with some polls, who believe now in global warming and climate change, but we have less than half who believe this is caused by human beings, by our industries. So I think that makes my point that these attribution studies are a lot more than brilliant science and interesting. They are helping us fight for our survival against deadly climate change, and particularly compound extreme events, which featured strongly in the sixth assessment of the IPCC.
Thank you so much, Peter. And thank you for mentioning the sixth assessment of the IPCC. One thing that I did notice on the website is there is a synthesis of that sixth assessment, and you can find it there. And one thing that I also think is it's just tremendous that so many of these scientific articles are freely available. You know, you can go on the website, search your topic of interest, warming of oceans. As Peter mentioned, extreme humidity in India. Check out the various scientific reasons of why this is happening. And as I said, most of these articles, there are over 500, are freely available, and it's a wonderful thing. I also have to say that it is much to my chagrin that many Americans, myself being one, still cling to the notion that climate change is God's will, an act of God, something we can't change, something we can't affect. Who hasn't been in a sauna? And it's like, you know that when there's more moisture in the air, it feels hotter, more extreme, because humidity has that effect. And of course, with greater heat, there's greater humidity. It's a difficult thing, you know, and again, going back to what Peter said, it is a great asset, this website. You can arm yourself with knowledge for your own sake, and also for the help of edifying others in your life, if you're not tired of doing that at this point. And I have to say, for every one of these shows that we do, it is an edifying process for me, and I hope it is for you. And I hope that you like, share, and subscribe. Share this video with someone who still may not be sure about climate change and whether or not it is anthropogenic, meaning caused by us. So, Paul, I wondered what else that you've found of interest, either on the website or related to these type of impacts.
Well, I think that the next few years, we're going to have a huge acceleration of effects. I think we're starting to see them already with all of these wildfires. You know, I'll go back to James Hansen's paper, Global Warming in the Pipeline, and he shows the temperature increase on the planet since turn of the century. So, you know, 100, 120 years of data. And for many years, the increase of global temperature was 0.18 degrees Celsius per decade, but something has shifted in about 2010. There's many reasons for it, but there's now a spread of temperatures that he's projecting into the near future. So there's two lines that he gives, sort of red lines, and we'll probably be somewhere in between them. The lowest of the lines is 0.27 degrees Celsius increase of temperature per decade. And the highest, the upper line, is 0.40 degrees Celsius per decade. So, you know, one of the major factors that's causing this uptick is the reduction of aerosols in the atmosphere from regulations from the shipping industry, cutting back in the sulfur percentage to less than 1%, and then even going to less than 0.1% in fuels that operate ocean-going ships, and also reductions in aerosols from industry with more scrubbers, etc. And the main reason this is being done is nothing to do with climate change. It's because air pollution, particulate aerosol pollution, is killing about 10 million people per year. Okay, so that was the big thing that is causing a reduction of this. But meanwhile, this is sort of like a Faustian bargain. These aerosols have provided some cooling for us while they're up there, but with fewer of them there, then the temperatures are rising. So also we're at the early stages of an El Nino, which is a very powerful warming variability in the climate system. So, we're going to rocket past these 1.5 degrees Celsius and 2 degrees Celsius targets, in the next little while. I mean, probably past the 1.5 within 5 years, within a decade or two, past the, a couple decades, past the 2-degree market. And we're already seeing huge disruption in weather patterns and extreme events that are very costly to humanity, but also to ecosystems. We're already seeing those things more and more often. So the climate casino, there's nothing stationary, or there's no new normal. We're heading up to much more catastrophic consequences. And whether you have an attribution or study to show that this is the case, then okay, fine and dandy. The climate doesn't care. It's doing what I and many other scientists, not many others, but some scientists are expecting, and then the mainstream is still way behind. There's a lot of scientific reticence. That's been a huge problem, people not really talking about what's really happening. So this is changing. This has to change. We need a human tipping point to address the climate catastrophe.
Thank you so much, Paul. And thank you for bringing up the climate casino. As many of you may know, we did a show on the climate casino, and we can link that in the description if you haven't seen it yet. It would be good to take a look at that. And I think that's such an apt term, Paul. I really like it a lot. Another thing, that I was thinking about as you were speaking, about how attribution is very important in terms of defining fault, if you will. We also did a program at the most recent COP in Sharm el-Sheikh on climate reparations. We'll link that one as well. It's a very important topic. It's kind of a sexy new topic in the climate science world. But when we're thinking about how these large emitting countries are affecting the lives of small island nation states, or people in India or Pakistan who are living in oppressive heat and suffering huge floods, it's also very important to figure out the degree of attribution so that these countries can go after the big emitters and say, hey, a third of Pakistan was underwater for a month because of the increasing rains and the storms and the stalling of these storms that your CO2 caused. Help us. So it's an emerging field, and it's a very, very important one. It'll be really interesting to see how humanity handles these coming catastrophes. And I also think it's really important, and we should never be shy of stating the fact that 1.5 is just, I hate to say it, but it's no longer alive. We've talked about it before, how in Glasgow they had a lot of signage when we were at the COP there. Keep 1.5 alive. It's just a dream, people. Sorry to bring you the bad news, but it's just a dream. Am I right, Peter?
Oh, yeah. The NAOA puts out every year two very important indicators which tell us how much heat we have in the pipeline to come, and that's atmospheric CO2 equivalent and radiative forcing. They're both record high and a big jump last year. So, yeah. As Paul says, 1.5, no way. 2C, we're headed. And the denial of this, unfortunately, in the majority of the scientific community is really, really bad because we're denying that 1.5 is inevitable within 10 years, we're not preparing for it. It's going to be way disastrous, and nobody's preparing for it. So I just wanted to walk you through a few of these attribution studies. So an early one was Kenya in 1617, they had severe drought, high temperatures, and substantial crop losses. And the attribution was out very fast. It was driven by climate change. You'll remember 2019, the summer of 2019, unbelievable heat in Western Europe and also up in Scandinavia. I mean, this was unbelievable. I'll read out a bit of their finding, and where they say, it is noteworthy that every heat wave analyzed so far in Europe in recent years, 2003, 2010, 2015, 2017, 2018, and now June of 2019, were all found to be impossible without global climate change. You'll also remember, of course, the summer of 2021, crazy Western North America heat, and also crazy Siberian heat, with that town in Siberia that had just an unbelievable record of temperature increase, completely crazy. So they did those, and those were definitely attributable to climate change. Also, of course, the big one to remember is the Northern Hemisphere. When was it? Well, that's just last year, wasn't it? When there was heat waves and these droughts with the rivers drying up right across the Northern Hemisphere. So we in the Northern Hemisphere, most of us felt that we would not do too badly from climate change. Well, that's written right out, because the attribution study was, yes, all of those events could not have happened without global surface heating and climate change. So very valuable work. And we all really appreciate the work that these scientists are doing.
Thank you so much, Peter. Yeah, I do think it's so important to emphasize that we are appreciative to these scientists. So many of them could be working in the public sector, making so much more money, but they're driven by their love of science and their concern for our planet and our world. We appreciate them. And we appreciate you, the audience, for joining us for this program. It was an important one, and we hope that you found it an informative one. Please, again, if you learned something, like the video. It helps us tremendously. YouTube runs on various software in the background, and the likes do a lot of good for us. And also share with us your thoughts on this particular video. We'd like to hear what you think. And we'll see you next time, the Climate Emergency Forum.